Back when the DS was first launched in 2004, Nintendo were adamant to prove to a market that was more interested in the PSP that this new system wasn't just a Game Boy with two screens instead of one. To do this, they released numerous games showing off the handheld's touchscreen capabilities, its microphone, how the two screens could be utilized, and, in the case of today's subject, show off its technical horsepower by remaking classic N64 launch title Super Mario 64. This new game, understandably titled Super Mario 64 DS, seeks to draw in and impress both newcomers and fans of the old with heavily improved graphics, tons of new power stars to find, numerous minute tweaks to the gameplay, and the ability to play as Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi. It's a lot of great new content, but I can't help feeling that Nintendo should have also tried to fix the core problems with the original game still lingering from 1996, some of which have actually gotten worse in the transition to the handheld format. It's an interesting experiment at tweaking what's still a damn good, if very flawed, game, but I recommend you either stick with the original or just get Super Mario 3D Land for some handheld platforming goodness. I'm FrDougal9000, and it's time to review Super Mario 64 DS for the Nintendo DS. It's a fine, sunny day in the Mushroom Kingdom, so fine in fact that Princess Peach has decided to invite her regular saver Mario over for some lovely cake. Bizarrely, the plump plumber also brings along Wario and Luigi, though in his defense, the day will probably be so uneventful and boring that he'll need something to keep him from falling asleep and choking on a slice of cake by accident. But much to the pants-shitting shock of everybody in the whole world in the history of everything forever, Bowser showed up before them and has imprisoned Peach, stripped the castle of the power stars responsible for its magic, and had the audacity to show up to this party wearing nothing but his kinky leather getup. They go in to try and stop him, but they're ultimately as useful as sunscreen for anyone traveling to the sun this winter, since they're also captured and tossed into the paintings holding dozens of magical worlds. So, with nobody else to help out, it's up to Yoshi to go into Peach's castle, free everyone, and beat up Bowser. In other words, this is the 3D sequel to Yoshi's Island we've all been waiting for, which should mean this is amazing! Actually, it's not. Well, it's not a Yoshi's Island sequel, which is very sad, but hey, we can all dream, right? Though story isn't the big thing people get into a frenzy over when it comes to Mario, it's certainly a lot better than the original version. There's a lot more mythology gags referencing numerous parts of the series before and after 64. Each of the four characters get different dialogue for everyone they talk to, and the overall writing has a bit more personality than before. It's probably the most unnecessary change, but one that's still appreciated nonetheless. So what about that there gameplay, the only reason most people are into Mario if we're not talking about how sexy Bowser is? To run newcomers through the basics, Mario 64 DS is a 3D platformer where you explore numerous worlds littered with all manner of secrets, challenges, enemies, and bottomless pits to overcome in order to collect as many of the 8 power stars hidden in each world as possible. These are used to open up several doors throughout Peach's castle that lead to more worlds to explore, bosses to fight, and, new to this port, playable characters to rescue. This time you don't just have the all-rounder Mario to play as, you can swap him for his lighter, slippier brother Luigi, the slower but stronger, not to mention much sexier Wario, and Yoshi, whose small hover and long-reaching tongue do a good job at easing new players into the swing of things as the first playable character on offer. Now, I actually really like the idea of having differently styled characters to suit each player's individual style, and there's enough variation between the four of them to do just that, but what I don't like is how the power-ups are done. In addition to these several jumps, attacks, and other moves you can use to get through each world, there's also a few power-ups, such as the flying cap to take you to the skies, the invisibility flower to go through thin grates, and the metal ability to sink to the bottom of areas that would otherwise push you away. In the original, you had all of these power-ups, but now they're divided between each character. Mario flies, Luigi becomes invisible, and Wario gets even heavier than before, because he's fat, ha ha ha. As an incentive to have players switch characters to get certain stars, it's not only frustrating since you're forcing that annoyance onto them instead of offering that choice, but also made pointless by the fact that you can now collect caps from certain enemies to turn into those respective characters. So all that's happened is that the characters have arbitrarily split up power-ups and have to acquire them by either backtracking to the room where you swap characters, or get the magic caps and risk losing them after one hit, which does happen a lot. In other words, you're just wasting time for no reason. Excellent. The navigation is similarly a double-edged sword. Thankfully, they've added a map on the bottom screen that tells you where you can find the star you're currently looking for, along with the red coins if you ask the pink bombs, so it is at least much easier to know where you're going in the more complex levels of the game. But it's actually getting there that's going to be the problem for two reasons, the biggest of which is the return of the awful camera. Made in an era before dual analog sticks and full camera control were invented, Mario 64 had the camera turned with the side buttons on the C-stick, which more or less acted like a second D-pad. The problem with this is that the camera would only turn at set angles, none of which ever pointed in the right direction anyway, and they'd always reset to the worst possible angle the moment you moved. This made it a pain to visually orient where to go and where not to fall off, and it's made no better here. There was an attempt to improve it by giving you touchscreen buttons that turn the camera however you like, but they barely work any better, basically just doing the same thing as their N64 counterpart. In a world where this kind of camera control had been addressed by countless other developers by 2004, it's a pain to see the creators of 3D platforming not try take any of that advanced expertise into account. And then there's the other problem, the movement, which is now done with the D-pad as opposed to the original's analog stick. At first, this doesn't seem so bad, but when you're trying to make precise movements in the game's later stages, it makes a whole world of a difference. Moving about feels slippery and unresponsive enough to stand out badly. The D-pad itself becomes painful to press down on for long periods of time, and hell, even with the 3DS's circle pad, it still doesn't feel quite right. If it's not an isometric game or one with Resident Evil style tank controls, using a D-pad to control the character in a 3D environment is the worst possible thing you could do besides removing the D-pad and forcing us to use the optional touchscreen controls. Yeah, did I forget to mention that? You can actually play the game by tapping the screen and dragging Mario along in a haphazard, often laggy manner that results in much annoyance. Because that's the best option to use in a 3D platformer, isn't it? Ugh. Okay, if it hasn't already been made clear, I kinda hate Mario 64 DS. I don't want to, because there's quite a bit of the game that I really like, but I can't ignore the problems that this port brings to make an already troublesome experience, at least for me, even more frustrating, and I wanted that to be the first thing to get off my chest. It's not a horrible port, oh god no, this isn't the Simpsons game on the PlayStation 2. There is indeed a lot to like about this port. The 30 extra power stars and bonus levels add a lot more content to what's already a game packed with things to do, and they retain a consistent level of quality with all the old content. The redone graphics are a technical achievement for the DS, let alone a launch title. By taking the game and improving the character models with more detail and personality, the textures are in higher quality so the worlds look more alive, and the frame rate never lets up no matter what's going on. And like I said earlier on, I really like the extra playable characters and how they add more ways to play the game thanks to their different physics and movesets, which can be a godsend towards clearing some of the tougher challenges. It's just a lot of the decisions, usually based on technical constraints with the controller or format, frustrate me to the point of hating this game. For the sake of fairness, everything I've just talked about is what the port has done. I mean, besides the camera, that has always been awful. What I'm hanging on to now is stuff from the original N64 version, but I felt it would be easier getting the port's strengths and weaknesses out of the way before heading to the heart of the matter. Is Mario 64 any good, despite what version we're talking about? Yes. In fact, it's very good sometimes, but it's also very flawed. Keep in mind, this was one of the first mainstream 3D games to be developed and released at a time where barely anything of that sort was available. Like the minds behind Final Fantasy VII, Tomb Raider, or Crash Bandicoot, Nintendo had no basis of comparison as to what worked and what didn't, so they just guessed as they went along and hoped for the best. So a fair share of problems are those I can understand as experimental errors such as the camera, though others are still unforgivable regardless. The gameplay itself is as good as can usually be expected from Nintendo. The controls are easy to grasp and there's little to no hassle pulling off the dozen or so moves on offer. The levels themselves are enormous enough to hide numerous little secrets while remaining fun to explore, and the platforming is often satisfyingly challenging to get through, especially some of the more obstacle-heavy levels like the Bowser Trials and the volcano inside Lethal Lava Land. There's also a lot of content to go around, with about 15 huge stages and tons of power stars to collect. The latter is particularly important for two reasons. One, the ways you can collect them varies from typical get to the top or beat the boss methods to more unusual things like bring a baby penguin back to its mama or chase a monkey around a really tall mountain. It means that it's never repetitive and there's an excitement to be had when wondering what the next stage is gonna have. Secondly, unlike later 3D Marios, You can get the stars in any order, even ones you're not looking for, didn't even know existed at that point. This adds a greater level of freedom and a desire to experiment without the fear of not getting a power star for some arbitrary reason. After all, even if it isn't the one you were looking for, a collectible's a collectible. It also helps players who can't get certain power stars by at least giving them another one as compensation, which is a big help in my case since this tends to become more common as I encounter more levels. And we better deal with that elephant in the room now. For me, Mario 64 is a game that progressively gets more and more annoying as it goes on. The first few worlds I find utterly delightful to play through. Most of the stars are easy to find and get, there's loads of opportunity to explore the levels without getting killed by environmental hazards or falling into bottomless pits, and they're a nostalgic treat for me personally. I love hopping about the rolling plains to the kick-ass brass of Bob-omb battlefields, swimming through the depths of Jolly Roger Bay, and wetting myself in the fear built up by the unsettling atmosphere of Big Boo's haunt. But about 5 levels in, when the difficulty decides to go up, that's when I all but lose interest. The levels become stuffed with those irritating environmental hazards and endless chasms of death, with only the slightest push from an enemy or jump cocked up by a misdirected camera angle being all that's needed to go over the edge. The stars get increasingly obtuse in their discovery, let alone actually collecting them, with levels like Big Little Island still baffling me over how to get any of the other stars beyond the top of the mountain one to this very day. I know increasing difficulty can be a strange thing to criticize, but here's my belief. If the game gives me everything I could possibly need to complete the level, including working gameplay mechanics and a clear understanding of what I can and can't do, it can be as hard as it likes, since it's given me a fair chance. Mario 64 doesn't do that. Hints towards finding the stars are vague, and finding my bearings is almost nearly impossible when so much is out to get me, or I have to clear some mandatory nightmare to get to the rest of the level every single time, like with Rainbow Ride, which by the way can die forever alongside Tick-Tock Clock. Not only are these really bad levels to end the game on by having annoyingly sadistic level design and even more hidden stars that could prompt gigabytes worth of forums wondering what the hell is going on and what to do, but the music track accompanying them is one of the most painful songs ever written in video games, which is the one you're listening to right now. Incessant like the underwater timer in old Sonic games with a harmonica that sounds ripped straight from a Final Fantasy Chocobo theme if Nobuo Uematsu decided to be a big pain in the bottom that afternoon, this tune only reminds me of the frustrating misery that this port brings every time I try to play through it again. It's not like I hate the music. Most of Mario 64's soundtrack, though small in selection and eager to reuse songs whenever it can, is damn good. The songs are really catchy, they have a universal mood that fits pretty much every level they're put into, and I personally love the hell out of them. Most of the tracks I've actually been playing throughout this review, they're that good that I wanted you guys to know that firsthand. But why do they have to use that bloody wacky slide song so often, and in the game's worst levels to make them even worse? Honestly, it's a mystery bordering on why we're all even existing. Also, screw the fact I have to get kicked back into the main hub if I die or quit that level with a 20-inch tipped jackhammer. It's bad enough having to go back to where I died, but I also have to waste my time jumping back into the painting or having to go through the castle to find that room all over again. There's a line between being fairly difficult and deciding to turn the game into a Kafka-esque ordeal, and I think we crossed that line and gone straight into bug-crawling wet dream territory long ago, don't you? God. Super Mario 64 is one of the most important games ever made. That can't be denied. Nor can it be denied how much of an astonishing technical achievement its DS port was at a time when the most advanced a handheld system could produce looked like a Super Nintendo game. And I'm not going to say that either of these are bad games. They're just games I personally can't stand, especially 64DS. Beautiful graphics, improved writing, even more ways to get power stars and explore the huge levels than they already were thanks to new characters, and tons more content are great. But for me, they don't do much to make up for the terrible camera, laggy controls, and whatever problems the original already had, such as its irritatingly difficult later levels and tendency to waste time. Again, it's far from a bad game, but due to my problems with it, I can only give it a rating of pretty good. What it says on the tin really. Nothing spectacular, but still fun to play nonetheless. Mario 64 DS is not available on the Wii U Virtual Console as of this script being recorded, and buying a new copy will cost you roughly $40 or £30, since Nintendo always gets off free for extortionate prices like they're a football sponsor. But it's easy to find used copies pretty cheap anyway, especially since the DS isn't region locked even when they're played on the 3DS. So you can just find the cheapest import possible and bring that over if there's nothing on the local side that works. But like I said, I'd recommend you stick with the original for the overall better game, and luckily it's both on the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console, or the excellent Super Mario 3D Land if you want some awesome handheld 3D platforming. Speaking of which, I think I'll go play the latter and forget about the horror of those last 2 levels. Thanks for watching, I hope y'all enjoyed this review for Super Mario 64 DS, and until we meet again, have a great day, y'all!